So currently we're running in development mode, and we've got a couple of files on the left hand side. One of them's called appsettings.development.json, and the other one's called appsettings.json. Now the development one, kind of obvious really, but this is the one that's used in a development environment, and in here it's got the information about the logging and the log level, and the default it's set to debug. And system is information and Microsoft is information. And what this means is that we get additional information put into the logs. And later on, when we look at our database queries, we'll start to see these inside here as well. Now this is great. And in our appsettings.json file, the logging level is set to default as warning. So we wouldn't see all of this information inside here if we're running in a different mode. Also, in our startup class, we've also got a setting for if end is development, then we're going to use the developer exception page. So first of all, let's take a look and see what this developer exception page actually is. And what this means is if our application encounters an exception, then this acts as a global exception handler, and it catches the exception and spits it out in a developer-friendly exception page. And let's take a look at what this is. In our values controller, in the first get method, I'm just going to throw an exception. So I'll just say throw new exception, and I'll just add test exception as the message. And we'll get a green squiggle warning saying there's unreachable code, because as soon as I hit this exception, then this code has got no chance of being reached. So we'll get a warning, but it's not going to stop us from running our application. So I'll just open up the terminal and I'll just stop the running .NET Run and I'll just restart it. And we get a warning saying there's unreachable code detected. Of course, we already know this. So I'll just go back to the browser and I'll just go to the values page. And this is the developer exception page. We get our exception details, the exception test exception, and this just matches the message that I put in there. And the important information is at the top. And it tells us the class that the exception was thrown in, along with the line number, along with the exception that happened. Now, down below here, you get a stack trace, which is not so useful, but it's there all the same. And we've got a bunch of other information about the request as well, including the headers that it returned to the client. So if that's what we get in development mode, what do we get in production mode? So let's take a look. And if I go back to VS Code, and I'll just stop the application again. And we also get the exception information inside our log. And where we've got fail, it tells us that an unhandled exception has happened while executing a request. And then we get the details of the exception. So let's see what happens when we're in a different mode. So if I go to my launch settings.json, and I'm just going to swap development for production. And I'm just going to open up the terminal window again. Just stop the application from running and just do another .NET run. And if I go back to the browser and I refresh again, I get an incredibly unhelpful "this page isn't working" message from the browser. And it does tell us that we've got an HTTP error 500. Now what we can do is take a look for more information from the console. And if we take a look at this, and don't like the position of this, so I'll just put it at the bottom. And if we take a look at the console, we get a very simple message saying the server responded with a status of 500 internal server error. And if we take a look at the network request, and if I just refresh the page again, now you can sort of see it briefly appear and then disappear. But I'm just going to click on preserve log inside Chrome and just refresh again. And now we get to see the error. And if we click around in here, we just get very little information. And there's kind of like a nothing to see here for our errors when we're in production. And this is great. This is what we want to send back when we're in production. We don't want to pass in all of that nice, friendly developer information, because if this was in production, that's too much information for an end user. Okay, so let's go back to our VS Code. What we do have, though, is the information about the error in the console still. We still get this logging output there. So later on in this course, and this is a good place to come and check if you've got a problem that you see in the browser, but you're not getting as much information as you would like to get, then you can always come back into the terminal and take a look at what's going on in here, particularly this area where it says fail. This is really good information about the problem that's happened because it gives us all of the information that we would have in our developer exception, but we can get it from the terminal even if we're running in production mode. Okay, so I'm just going to stop the application and I'm going to go back to the launch settings and just change this back to development. And I'm going to go back to my values controller and clean out the throw new exception. And while I'm here, there's just another thing I want to show you at the same time, and that's the use of .Net Watch Run. We don't have to stop and restart the server every time when we make a code change in ASP.NET Core. What we can do is use .Net Watch Run and just press return, and this will watch our files to see if there's any changes that have been made. So we're back in development mode. I'll just go back to the browser again. I'll refresh the page. I get value 1, value 2. If I go back to the code again and I say, let's say for example, I change value 2 to value 3, then I save it, then notice in our terminal window it automatically restarts the server. It's not instant though, so you're still gonna have to wait a few seconds for this to restart. But once it has, we'll be able to go back to the browser, refresh, and we'll see the new value in there. And we didn't need to manually stop and restart it. Another thing you might want to do is turn on the Autosave feature in VS Code, and you can get to this from the File menu. And if I just change the value and just don't do anything, it'll automatically save my file. And when the file's saved, then the server will restart.